is this. So we have this method called a premium user count, right? Where what we do is, we select just how many premium users are there in the database. And you can see that we import from our database. Really, let's probably do this the right way. Normally, the way that we'll do this is you can pass through the cursor to the method, and then that will select. And then when you write the test, that you'll pass through the cursor again. So why would we do it that way? The reason is because you're going to have multiple databases, right? So remember, like if we have, say we have a Flask app, right? And then we have from Flask, import Flask, and then you create the Flask app, right? And then from here, let's say there's just premium users, just to make it simple. And then we'll def premium. Well, this is like our development. Here we'll probably want to use, standardly like our development database. So what you can do is, import scicopg2, and then do something like scicopg2.connect, and here you'd put in the CRM development, okay, and this would be our connection here, and then we'll create a cursor, and then now what can we do? Well, now we can actually import the method, right, from index and pass through our cursor. And our cursor, in this case, so we'll say from index, import the premium user count, right? And that will give us back some value count, and then we can return this to the user. Okay, so in this case, this can be like our development database, right, that we can pass through. And then in the test, we can connect to, you can see, this is actually a connection to my test database, create the cursor object. This cursor object is connected to the test database, right? And then we can have this database. Everything here isn't messing with our development data. It's all messing with our test data, right? It's all messing only with our test database. So this isn't, and then when we perform the select statement, this is also, in this case, because we're passing through the cursor for the test database, right? It's running that query against the test database when ultimately we do cursor.execute, select all. So the idea is, by passing through either the cursor or the connection object or both, what you're doing is you're specifying through this whether or not the query is going to be run on the development database or the test database. And just remember, the reason why you have separate databases is, well, the development database is like your sandbox. Like we might always be creating users, destroying them, just to play around with our code and our application. But the test, this we want to keep very clean. It's like running an experiment. If you just think of going to the lab, right? Running an experiment. Your workspace is clean because you're setting up, before and after, and you don't want anything else to interfere with that cause and effect relationship. So that's what we do when we run our tests. You can see that what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I'm going to delete, clean my table, right? Delete all from customers. Then commit this change. Then I will create 2 new customers, right? 1 premium, 1 standard. And now I can be sure that this function works if there's only one, if it counts them and only finds that there's 1 premium user. If along the way, right, I just accidentally created another premium user, that would obviously throw off this test. So you can't, you have to use this cleaned environment, this clean database, and we reserve the test database for that purpose. Okay? Yeah, Conwell?
Okay, Jeff, just a quick question related to this. So, as you put this premium user count in index.py, but if in case we have multiple methods we're calling, so is it better idea to put them in a service folder and in those respective files like user service and stuff like that?
Oh, are you talking about here, or are you talking about the
Yeah.
in app.py?
No, I'm talking about the premium user count definition. If is it better to put it in respective files in a service folder we can create in a project?
For this, so this would be at the model layer, I would think. The reason why is what's kind of immediately telling me that is the model layer is very closely connected to your database. So oftentimes any queries that you run, right? There, if you kind of find yourself directly writing SQL, that should typically occur in the model layer. The services, remember, kind of like tie things together. So, for example, if it's something like find the premium user and give the premium users a discount, right? Then I would probably have a method that selects all the premium users. That would be in the model layer. So let's actually do it. So def premium users pass through the cursor, and then we'll just, instead of selecting count, we'll just select all from the users. So this will give us, the premium users. And then, in a services, let's call it like discount, like offer discount .py. It could be, but what would that do? That would, from the index, import the premium users. So give me my premium users. The premium users. And then you can write a function like def, discount, premium users. Right, and that will first of all select my premium users, and then you take the premium users for a user in premium user. Let's say there's a method called discount. I don't know, but something like that, right? So you can see this kind of like I'm not directly calling the database here. Instead, I'm using this method that would be in the model layer. And that's where my SQL is, and that this kind of like does almost what sounds like a business procedure. So it's those kind of hints that tell me that this is probably what belongs in the service layer. It's more like business logic, like a business procedure, oftentimes like multi-step, and then the model layer is querying data, right? But you can think about it like this changes data, right? If I discount the user, that changes the price, I guess, or something like that, right? So it follows our like query command principle. Commands more typically in the service layer, queries, right, more typically in the model layer. Very, very good question.
Makes sense. So when you say model, this means that these methods will possibly in the customer's model.
Exactly right. Yep,
Okay,
exactly right.
got
You
it.
could imagine that we would change this file to be called customer, and that this could be, wrapped inside the customer class.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
cool.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So yeah, so the model layer, that's a really good point. Like the model layer, very close to the database. So your SQL queries, oftentimes you want to push them down to the model layer. All right. Uh, Okay, so what do we have? We have this premium user count method, and then we have the test that tests it, right? And we said that basically, remember, just to review, we have three different kinds of databases typically, right? Remember, so we have your production data, you have your development data, and you have your test data, right? I know I'm taking a minute to describe this, but it's important to understand it. And remember, production data, we as developers, we're on like a need to know basis. We will like it that way because we don't want to mess with some real live data, either annoy the customer or annoy our boss or the boss's boss, and right manipulate that, corrupt the data, and that's really problematic. So we want to be able to like make our changes on synthetic data, right, on some fake data, uh, So that's what we can do in development. In development, we can just like play around. It's our playground. We can create, destroy, test all our methods, different scenarios, and kind of like be free and not worry about it. But the test, we want to set up these controlled experiments. So, we can't just create and manipulate this so freely. We always want to start with a clean environment, run the test, create any data, do any setup, run the test, check that the results make sense, and then clean up after ourselves. So that's the test database, all right? So production live data, development is like our sandbox for developers, can be really individual to us as a developer, and then test is to run a particular experiment. All right, so, okay, so you can see, right, that's what's happening here. Clean up, right, have a clean workspace, insert the data, and then actually run the method, check that this thing does what it should do, meaning if there's one premium user, it should count that there's only one, and then finally clean up after ourselves. We can run the test. You can see I ran it beforehand, right? And this passes. So we are good. Now, what a fixture does is it moves the setup, right? This part all here is setup. This is, the actual assertion, and then this is the cleanup afterwards. The fixture will allow us to move the setup and the cleanup to basically like a separate function. All right, so the way to do this is you just do from PyTest, import fixture. Yeah, that's fine. And then we can do, basically this is a decorator now, so it decorates the function below it. And we can call this like premium users, or build premium users, build users, sample users. And what this will do is now here we'll basically take this code. Remember what this code did was it deleted, started clean, right? Clean up our mess, insert a couple users, one premium, committed the change, and then what we want to do is after building the users, we'll yield to my function, to my test, and then we'll clean up. So let me just show this. So we'll yield and yield to the function and then clean up. And the way that this thing, now if we just run this, right, we wrap this in the word fixture, it seems like we put the word yield in the right spot, and I'll go through this all again, but I just want to show you this will currently not work, right? It will run our test, it won't do any of this. Let me just put a breakpoint here to prove it. So I'm gonna run PyTest, right, and you can see we never hit our breakpoint. We get a failing test, but we never hit our breakpoint. So in order to call the fixture, what you need to do is put the name of the fixture in the parentheses of your test. So we'll do build sample users. We'll go right here. I'm not executing. I'm just literally putting the name. And then that will hit our breakpoint. Go through, clean up, insert in a couple users, yield. The yield yields to the method that was about to be run. So this will come next. This is breakpoint number 2. Then it will run the test, right? Assert that there actually is one, and then finally we'll hit our third breakpoint. Okay, number 3. So basically what happens is we're going to run PyTest. PyTest is going to see this word test, right? That we need to run this test, but it will also see that this has a fixture. Once it sees the fixture, it will go to that first, hit the breakpoint, do the setup. Yield means continue on with the test it was about to run. So it'll run this assertion, and then it will finally go back to finishing this fixture up by deleting from customers. So let's see it. So now you can see we're on line 10, build sample users. There's my line 10, right? So hit the breakpoint first, even before going to this function. Do continue. Now we'll yield down to breakpoint number 2. So now we'll continue on with the test, right? So here we are at breakpoint. Here's the assert statement, right? So we're basically right here. Now we'll run the assert, so we'll confirm that there is just, one user, that we found the one premium user in the database. Do continue, and now you can see we're still not done because it has to do this, finish the fixture, which says to delete all from customers. And then we finally pass. Okay. So that's a fixture. And the nice thing about it is, you can reuse the fixture. So if you want to do def test like the normal user count, or I think I call it standard user count, right? You can basically just pass the same fixture in, build sample users, and then we would assert that the standard user count is 1. And of course we would need a corresponding method called, like standard, where the category is standard, and then just call this standard user count. Cool. Let me see the questions. Do we create multiple methods when the methods have joins? Not really, so, let's say what you can do is, so the question is, right, do we need like two methods, right? If you have, if the underlying SQL query has joins, say we have a user, like the premium user has many, discounts or purchases. Maybe purchases makes more sense. We can write a method called like premium user purchases, right? And pass through a cursor, and then what would that be? Select all from customers where the category equals premium, but now let me do a triple quotes. Now we will join, we'll just do the join right here. Join purchases on customers.id equals purchases.customer ID, if this is how it's set up. Okay, so you can just have kind of like this one method return, and what will this return? It will return the purchases. You can probably change this to purchases.star, and now return just the purchase information. Is it typical to build sample data, or would a test database with a sample data already be set up to connect to? It's typical. So yeah, I think the question is, this seems like do we really need to do this right here? Can't we maybe have a database that has some sample data already set up with it? For typically, just to go back to that diagram, the sample data, like having a database with sample data, typically that would be the dev, like your sandbox. Like you might have some data already done for you, but the test database probably, like I would say no, if it's, in my opinion, if it's done correctly. Why is that? Well, let's go to the test. The setup of the data tells you, tells you what to expect. In other words, if you look at this, we're inserting in a premium user and a standard user. If we have a method called what's the number of premium users, it's by virtue of this, it's by virtue of seeing that there's a premium user and a standard user, that we know the answer should be 1, and that this only properly works if the answer is 1, right? So if you have some test data already, there in the database for you, it's hard to know that actually worked, because you then have to requery the data to count how many premium users there are, and then you can with your eyes verify that this makes sense. Here I can, as a developer, I can just read this and confirm it. So this data, you can think of these tests, they're almost they're almost like live documentation, right? If I want to understand this, and I'm, maybe the method name sucks, it's not as explicit as this is, well, you can kind of see what it does with a good test. It's oh, okay, this returns to me the one premium user, and or all the premium users, and that makes sense because, we only have one. So I like the fact that everything is right here in front of me. Would we used to get a copy from production for tests? Yeah, but if you write tests, typically you don't want to do that. Like, you can use, again, like, you can use it for like development, and then you can take what you can do. What I've seen, I mean, I'm sure different organizations have different ways. What you can do is you can copy this production data into development, and then you basically want to hide all the personally, right, what's called PII, personally identifiable information, right? So what you can do is, like, take the columns of first name and last name, delete it, and then replace it with fake first names and last names, and obviously socials and phone numbers, right, and email addresses. But other things, like maybe the age or the hometown or whatever, as long as it's not revealing, you can keep that the same if you want. So it does it. So you can do that for development. For testing, they're like, at this level, at least for like a backend API. Typically, what you want to do is create your own test data. The reason why, again, is so that you can verify, like, that the method actually works. That when it says I'm going to select all the premium users, right? If it was test data and I just copied it from production, we might have 1 million premium users. How are you going to write a test that asserts, like, every one of those users matches? That's not fun. Instead, you just create 2 in your test database and assert that you get back those 2 premium users, and that's a lot easier to do, and it's also a lot easier to read. So that's the reason why. So yeah, I mean, the answer is, like, as a developer, right, like, we would write up these different scenarios. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And you can reuse the fixtures in different tests if you want to. But, like, this is supposed to serve almost like documentation, the tests. Like, that's a way you can think of it. It's like live documentation, right? It's showing you when this occurs, this is what I should get back as the result. And, like, like I said, like the first thing I would do as a developer is, like, you get the story, and the story typically says, like, as an analytics person, I want a method that returns to me, or maybe not I want a method, I want to be able to calculate the number of premium users. So then what you'll do is you'll take this story and you'll turn it into a test. Okay, cool. Well, I need to give myself some premium users. I need to give myself some non-premium users, right, to make sure it's not counting them. Then I actually run the test, right? If I just rely on the production data, like, what if there aren't any premium users? Or what if there's only premium users, and I write a method then that's just selecting all the data, but once I get a standard user in there, I'm not properly testing that scenario. So that's why I think it's best to do this, in a very controlled way. Cool. Hopefully I made my case, but I don't know. All right. Other questions? No? Okay, so what we got is so you can, if you want, you can reread the testing with databases. That's basically what we just went through, and then do the lab. The lab may feel a little confusing at first. Let me just tell you a second about it. There's 2 files in the lab. So the first one is what I call, like, a mock database, meaning what you're doing is we want to assert here, the test asserts that employee 0 is Bob. Notice there's nothing in this list. So what you'll need to do is write a fixture, right, this employee's table fixture, that first adds something to the list, right? So what I did, in real life, you'd be adding stuff to a database, but I want you to see, hey, you can start and literally just add things to a list or remove things from a list if that's what it asks you to do. The instructions tell you what to do. But here you start off just adding stuff to a list instead of a database. Then in the next file, this test a mock DB, you add and kind of remove things from a list, I think. And then in test B, here you actually, will have to write the fixture that, that sets up the data so that you get back Bob Smith, okay? And that you get back one user, okay? So currently there's no data in the actual database, but you'll need to, and there's no fixture here, but you'll have to create the fixture that first does the setup and ideally also does the cleanup of your customers table, okay? So that's the two tasks. So it's just practice what we just showed, writing these fixtures. Okay, cool. It stands for Object Relational Mapper, and let me just create. So what that means when you say object, right? Object Relational Mapper, right? The object obviously is like a Python object. We've seen that like a user, and then the relation is really like a table, or really, the way to think about it is like an instance, right? An instance of a class, right? Like a user instance would correspond to a record in the database, right? Which makes sense. I don't know if I'm saying anything groundbreaking here, right? But what we'll do with the object relational mapper is draw that connection a little bit closer. So the first thing that we'll do, really like the main thing we'll do here, is actually like create a save method. So the way this will work, one second. Okay, so the way that this works is you can see, I connect to the database named CRM users. All right, and you can see I have this create users table, and we just gave users an ID, a name, and a birthday. And then in the console.py, we create a connection, we create a cursor. Here we'll have an instance, and the idea is to call a method called save, which will take my user object and then take the connection and the cursor, and then with this information, like with the instance and the connection to my database, be able to save the user. What does that mean? To call like the corresponding insert into statement, So on this user, to insert in his data. So how would something like that work? Well, I actually did some of this. Let me delete this. All right. So you can take a look at it here. Let me move this down. So what's happening is, remember the users is the instance, right? The connection is connection database and the cursor, etc. Then all we'll do is we'll do cursor.execute the insert string, where the insert string is insert into users, the name and the birthday, right? Like these are the columns, and these are the values, %s, %s. And then where will that come from? Where are these values actually come from? I can do the instance.dunderdict.values, right? I can kind of get that instance's values and pass them through here. Let's put a breakpoint and then call connection.commit. Okay, so let's put a breakpoint here. So Python 3-i ORM, console.py. So I'll run the console, right? And that will create this user object. So it creates the user. You can see in the user class that we just have these columns, ID, name, birthday. You pass through a list of values. I zip them, the columns, with the values that you pass through. So if I look at this user object, where you go back to the console, the user.dunderdict, where you can see it's not set up properly. That's a bummer. Let me fix this. I'll just remove this for now. It's fine. Now it's better. Okay, so I just had a mismatch between the values and the columns. So that's fine. And okay, so we have user.dunderdict, and anywhere I can do user.name and equals Sam. And again, the way I do that is just pass through the values as a list, Sam and his birthday, and then zip together the columns and the values. And now the next step is, so we have this user instance, we want to call save. We'll pass through the user, the connection, and the cursor. And this actually, when I do that, well, I have the breakpoint. So let's see what happens. So I'm in the save method, cursor.execute, right? I'm in this method right here. Insert into, name values, here's the values, okay? The values is the user object, right? This object that we passed through, which is the user object.dunderdict, right? It gives me the dictionary entry, and then I can do .values, which gives me this, and then I can just convert this to a list, okay? It just doesn't work in the console, but this is fine. So now I can take this list of values, right, and pass them in with my insert string, and then as we know, right, this will take each one of the values and correspond with each one of these percentage S's. And then we can select all from users. You know, basically I'm gonna, after I insert it, we can select the last user inserted to return it. You know, if I just do continue, we'll get this back. Let's do this all one more time. I'll just show you how it works. So basically what we can do is we can create a new user. Let's call this Michael. Okay. And he's born on the 12th. And we'll just run console.py. Here's my user, user.dunderdict, right? Name is Michael. Then we'll save the user, user, and connection and cursor. And you see that? It created a new user whose name is Michael, and this is his birthday. So this makes it a lot easier, right, than writing these insert into statements. And the idea is just like we can make, you know, automate some of our work by wrapping our SQL in these types of methods like save. Now, currently, it's not so great because it only works for the users table, right? The users table needs these columns, right? It's not like we can just, you know, if we have another class called like product.py and want to use the save method on this, well, that's not going to work, right? Because, right, we've hard-coded these values. So what we can do, what we want to do is like start to not hard-code this. So the way that we can do this is we just need to replace everything kind of that is particular to the instance. So this is a user instance, and what I did was I have this attribute that I just added in here called dunder table. Like there's nothing, and then you can, and now we can reference this. So let me show you. So instead of doing save insert into users, we can say insert into object dot dunder table, right? And when I pass through a user instance, it will call user instance dot dunder table, and that will return to me, right, the user's string because it's right here. Okay, and then same thing. Well, what about this? Well, these columns are hard coded here. Okay, right? I put them here, so I can do kind of the same thing. We just need to generate this string. So I can do something like, let's put a breakpoint here. So run this again. I'll do just run this, and then we'll call save user connection cursor, and then object dot dunder table dunder, right? That returns my users thing. If it was a different object, as long as we have this attribute, it would return, you know, the products table. And now we want to get object.columns, and we can, you know, we want to turn it into this string. How do we do that? Well, we can just probably join them, right, on the comma, and that will give me, right, the column string. So we can do something like this. It would be here, sorry. The column string would go, or yeah, it would go here. Okay, and then the same thing for the values. Like how many, these percentage S's, you know, if I have a third column, there's not going to be 2 of them, there's going to be 3. So basically what we need to do is kind of like find the length of, it's a little harder than we probably should do the object dot dunderdict dot values. We can just find the length of this probably, 2, and then multiply that by like a percentage s. Almost. I think I can multiply it by this. Yeah, see that? So it gives me 2 percentage s's, and then I can just join them. I did it wrong. Let's just call this the S list, and then we'll just join the S list. Okay, so the same kind of thing, right? We can just, fill this just Python. And this will be my S string. And now that we have it, we can put this here. Okay. And then the last thing, right, we're getting these values, right? So here we got the kind of the keys by doing object.column. Here we have the values by doing object dot obj, right, dot dunderdict dot, that gives me a dictionary dot values. So that's take these values, a list of values, and pass that through as a second argument here. Okay, and then we finally make the commit. So here what we're doing is we're creating like the particulars of the insert statement. And then we can always select all from the object.dunder table. Okay, order by limit 1. Let's see if this works. So we'll do Python 3, create the console. Remember, in this console, we have the user, and then we'll just do save the user and pass through the connection cursor, and that works. Right, created that 5th user. Okay, and what's nice about this is now if I create a product class and I define the table as products and some columns, let's say as like the name of the product. Let's just do name, and let's say the like creation date. I don't know. And now let's create if not exists products and creation date. And let's say drop table if exists users, drop table if exists products. Right, and now let's just run this against the database. What database does this connect to? Let's see. It connects to our CRM users. So do PSQL-D CRM users -f create users .SQL. Products destination, drop table, create table, create table. All right, before I move on, let's see the question. Is this dunder table used by something else? What is the advantage of Python providing this for classes? If we had used a class level variable table, yeah, I mean, this is not a built-in Python thing. This is actually a class level variable. This is on the class products. So that is what we're doing, right? We're just creating a class variable products in columns, and now we're referencing it. That's all we're doing.
I see. I'm curious why the dunder though. Then why just without?
Why not just use the word table? Only because I think this is how SQL Alchemy they use this syntax, so I'm trying to match it. But otherwise, there's no reason. So the library, like the professional library we'll eventually use, you'll have to do the same thing. But you'll just it'll plug into their library instead of our little library. Cool. So now if we create a product that has this, and I probably should do the same thing with the init, meaning these two lines, right? This is where I can pass through a list of values. And now I do this, then we can pass through a list of values for the product. So let's go back here. Do product equals from user, import user, from product, import the product, and then product, and the product will be, you know, like an Alexa, and which is also a person's name, and then we'll do the creation date is like, yeah, maybe it was, I don't know, 2014. Okay, so we do that, and then we want to save the product. So it'll be the same type of thing, we'll just change this to product. Connection.cursor. Let's put a breakpoint back to here. Take a look at it. Oh, beating the clock again. And then run Python 3 -i console.py. So we create a product, hopefully. That seemed to have worked. Then we pass through the product. So if I look at object, right, I'm right here. Right, we save that object, pass through the connection to the database and the cursor. If you look at the insert string, see this? This now says insert into products the name and the creation date and the values. Where did that come from? Well, it came from the table, object table of the products. So that's the products, insert into products. And then the name and the creation date, that came from this object.columns. Okay, and that gives me, the object.columns, and then I just joined it together. So that gives me this column string, and then we wanted the number of percentage S's to match, so I just got the length of the values, you know, expanded the array or the list, and then joined that list together. So I generated this. And then finally I should do select all from products, give me the last one, and display it. If I do continue, it doesn't actually, I'll just have to do this one more time to actually see the result. But that should work fine, I think. So just save the product. Right, and there's my Alexa. Okay, February 12th, 14. Okay. That's the general idea. The methods I wrote are a little fancier. The reason why is, you know, for a couple things. Basically, the main reason why is, let's say there's, you know, multiple columns, but you only, you know, we only populate the user with, you know, some of them. Like, for instance, I could give my user an ID, right? Like maybe I get that from the data set or something, or I want it to auto-populate. Or let's say maybe a better example is I know the user's name, but I don't know his birthday, right? So when I create an instance, you can imagine that I do user, and I just create the instance like this. Well, you know, right, create a user, like just pass through the first value. What would I expect to happen? I'd expect you to create a, you know, the database to create a new user that says Michael, but there's no birthday. So I'd have to actually update the code here, not too much, but right, I would have to. One thing I should probably do, the way I wrote it is I broke this out into like a method called values of the object, where you pass through an object, and I'll say go through all the columns for object.columns, right? But only return that column, for column in object.columns, only return that column if the column is in object.keys. So basically, I define for, let's say for user, give me all the columns. Sorry about that. Give me all the columns, ID, name, and birthday, but only if I actually have a value for the name, birthday, etc. Right? So if I create a new user, right, if I create it, I'll just do it down here for a second. If I create a new user and I pass through just, you know, Michael, and then I say something like, well, you know, only, you know, go give me back column for object.columns, for column in object.columns, but only if the object dot dunderdict dot only if it's one of those keys that I've, only if it's an attribute that's been set. Okay, so I'd probably have to advance to change this method as well in order for this to work, for it to be dynamic. But that's kind of that's if you look at the method, it's written like this. Okay, so the idea is, spit out for the keys, give me all the keys in the columns, but only if I've actually set an attribute on the instance. And then for the values, what we can do is say, well, go to the object.dunderdict and slash the column attribute, right? If this is a dictionary, sorry that this is starting to get confusing. Here, if I have a product.dunderdict, I can say, okay, go through all the columns here, name and creation date, and spit out the corresponding value. How do I do that? I can say, for column in the product.columns, just return product.dunderdict, this dictionary, and do the square bracket of the column, right? So that way, I go through all these columns, the name, where when I go to the name one, it gives me back Alexa, right? That's the corresponding value. Then I go to the next column, creation date, it gives me back this value. And only do that, if the same thing, if only go through all these columns, if the column is in the object dot dunderdict dot keys, it's fine. All right, that's the idea. Let me see. I have a couple questions. Let me see. Is it better to use object.dict.keys instead of object.columns? You basically just need to. There's a couple things we're doing. You basically just need to make sure that there's a match. That both this is one of the specified columns, one of the columns that you're allowing, and that it's a column, and that is something that is an attribute of the instance. That's basically what you're doing. Because I don't want you to be able to pass through any old attribute, right, on my instance and save it, because that's not going to work. We only have certain columns in the database. So that's why we have to both specify them here and also make sure they line up on the instance. So that you can see I'm doing that by iterating through the columns and then also checking it's on the instant, right? We're checking for a match. It might feel a little confusing. It's okay if it's not 100% for you. Let me see if there's other questions. Will zip work on iterables? No. So this is a problem. Miles is asking, will zip work on iterables of different lengths? No. So this method, I think Miles is pointing out, this method is not 100%, right? Because if, say, they only pass through, name. Well, really, if they only pass through name, I think zip will be fine. It will just, and that we have these corresponding. If they only pass through name, then it's not going to. Then we have 3 columns on one side that we're zipping only one value on the other. So this is actually a little simplistic. What you can do, I forget how I did it in the reading, but probably what I did was, you have to, I forget, it's something like using the set attribute method, on the instance, and then the key value. I forget exactly how I did it, but so this will need to be updated. I apologize for that, but you can see, I think the reading has it correct, has it set up a little bit differently. I just did it this way to keep this a little bit simpler, but you're right, this would need to be updated. Okay, but the general idea, I hope you're able to see, is that, and you won't have, no one's going to make you write this from scratch except for me, but you basically just need to practice, Python. That's the whole exercise. And then the exercise is seeing, how something like this is possible. That it's really not magic. It's just taking these attributes that you put in your class and then, using them in your underlying SQL statement. That's it. Okay? Cool. All right. And then the other thing is being able to use these methods that we generate, like being able to use the save method, things like that. So I think that's probably pretty good. Do the readings. I will, give you this reading. We can talk about class methods. Actually, I'll let you do the reading and lab on class methods if you have time. Or at least do the reading, and then we can. I'll give a lecture on class methods later. I feel like this is enough material.